this is going to be a robotic process automation for Meditech healthcare cases in collaboration with UiPath, who's going to be talking a little bit about robotic process automation, some of the clients that they've worked with. And we're going to go through some of these different cases that we've worked on and what the cost and return on investment was for them. So we're going to start by talking a little bit about SphereGen. So SphereGen was founded in 2008. We are a UiPath Silver partner. We have offices located in North America, New Haven, Connecticut, Switzerland, and Pune, India. We specialize in the healthcare industry and use the agile methodology. So some of our additional offerings that we have, so in addition to robotic process automation, we do augmented reality, virtual reality, and mixed reality development through multiple devices, the HoloLens, iOS, Android desktop, and Oculus. We do application modernization, application development, things like in the healthcare industry, we would do things like EHR integration, telehealth integration, and so forth. We also do application support above and beyond that. And we are, again, a UiPath Silver partner and a Microsoft partner, both gold in application integration and application development, and a silver cloud platform partner. So just talking a little bit about some of the things that we do here, EMR, EHR integration. Some of the key points here, we do work with a lot on the payer, provider, and patient data sides. We do FHIR, HL7, and CCDA are some of the standards and formats that we work with. Ted, do you want to elaborate a little bit beyond that?
No, I think we can cover a lot. We do a lot of the integration, as you said, whether it's Mirth as a transport tool or process automation transport. So we can cover a lot of those in the details we're talking about today.
Perfect. Thank you very much. All right, and I'm going to turn this over to Melvin to go ahead and present some of his information and talk a little bit about UiPath and the UiPath healthcare footprint.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. So hello, everyone. I'm Melvin Hutchins with UiPath. I'm part of our industry team, and specific to healthcare, I have about a 20-year background in healthcare IT. I have served as a junior executive for companies like Allscripts and Philips, as well have built several startups. Probably my biggest claim to fame was I helped author federal legislation around opiate abuse to essentially provide analytic tools for provide funding for analytic tools so physicians could better assess whether they should prescribe an opiate or not. But I've been here with UiPath for about 4 years. We started our healthcare industry team in 2019, January 2019, and really that was because we understood that healthcare as a community, and I think that that's one of the really things I wanted to focus on today, healthcare as a community is really that. It is very peer-based organizations that are happy to both share and provide knowledge and access to information for the improvement of providing care, regardless if we're competitors in a similar market, but it's really more about the patient. So when we started our healthcare practice, we went with the intentions of a very community-based approach. And as you can see, and these are just some of the logos that we've added, but we have added logos across the entire continuum, which includes both payer, providers, and also life sciences. So it is really our vision and goal is to provide better access to care for patients and a better experience for the providers. Can you go to the next slide, please?
Sure.
So when we talk about community, one of the things we did in early 2020, it was like literally, I think it could have been my last meeting before getting into the lockdown. in Columbus, Ohio, we met with a group of about 5 hospitals, and it was our inaugural meeting of what we call the HIE. It's the Healthcare Intelligent Automation Alliance. It's now grown. It's a group of about 200 hospitals. They get together quarterly to talk about automation and the opportunities of automation together. There are no vendors that participate in that. It's chaired by the Cleveland Clinic, and we started it, but the Cleveland Clinic runs it. And essentially, it's an open, safe forum that is not related to tools, but more solutions. But in addition to that, one of the things that we understood that we needed to do was really to create better relationships and partnerships with the technologies that are embedded within the healthcare system. One of the things that we're talking about today, specifically on Meditech. So how can we build and foster partnerships and relationships? And that's one of the real things that I was so excited to be joining SphereGen today, because they have such a depth of knowledge specifically in Meditech. I remember when we first hit in 2019, we attended our first HIMSS down in Orlando, and the first question out of anybody's mouth was always, "What do you do with blank? What is my EHR? What do you do with Meditech? What do you do with Allscripts? Are you integrated?" So I'm excited about talking about Meditech solutions today, and anxious to learn and listen and learn more. But within that, I would also encourage you to go to our UiPath Marketplace Connect, and there what you'll find are also a bunch of accelerators that'll allow you to get to market ready solutions faster, and be able to use those things such as like an EDI translator to transfer an EOB into an EDI EDI transaction. So thank you so much for having me. 2 quick plugs, and then I'll turn it over to the SphereGen team. So the first plug is that we will be attending HIMSS. So if you see somebody in an orange shirt on the floor, grab them and say, "I want to learn more." And we'd be happy to have a conversation or set up a meeting. The second is that following HIMSS, we are going to have a healthcare summit at our event called Forward in October in Las Vegas. But we are creating a specific healthcare summit for all of the either UiPath customers or to be partners to come in and talk about different solutions around healthcare, around what other people are doing. How can you really accelerate enterprise automation across both clinical and non-clinical areas? So that's what I have. And once again, that's in October at the Bellagio in Vegas. And I hope to see you there. Thanks so much, guys.
Great. Thanks, Melvin. Really appreciate that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to switch this over and change it over to Ted Dinsmore, who's going to be talking a little bit about some of the use cases that we've had. We have 3 of them here today to discuss with you. So Ted's going to go through the use cases and some of the return on investment and benefits, and we're going to be showing some demo clips along with that. So Ted, I'm going to flip to the next slide and feel free to take it away.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Melvin. It's always great to be presenting with UiPath again, and we look forward to seeing you at HIMSS as well. So today we're going to talk about some of the really deep stuff we've done in Meditech integration. We're going to drill down on 2 use cases here, very specifically, given the amount of time that each one of these things take. We chose 3 use cases today to talk about. We're going to talk about revenue cycle management. We're going to talk about HIE integration and telehealth integration. But I wanted to start out this slide with a lot of different things that we have done. And this is just a sampling of all we've done with the Meditech integration work we've been doing at hospitals. And one interesting I wanted to point out before we get too far is the GE to Meditech migration and the ECW doc conversion. These were actually conversion projects where we're migrating from one component to another. We're migrating Meditech to GE or GE to Meditech in this case. And we actually had these migrations, if you've ever done migrations in a lot of different hospital systems, can be very painful and take a year of effort. It's a lot of testing, make sure we get the data right. But we used UiPath to automate that testing process extensively. So we're not going to cover those today, but I just want to kind of highlight those as some other things that we've done. And we can spend some more time at the end of this presentation on them. But there's been a tremendous amount of work we've done in the hospitals with Meditech integration. And we're going to spend most of the time today on HBill, HIE, and Telehealth. So let's go ahead and start into the HBill portions. So when you get into revenue cycle management, go to the next slide, please. Yeah, when you look at revenue cycle management, HBill is a large component of this. And anybody that's worked with Meditech for any length of time can understand that there's so many steps when you're going through to create a bill and to create the PO system. In this case, was we spent a lot of time on creating a purchase order, right? And there's a number of fields you have to fill in. There's a number of steps you have to go through before you can actually create the purchase order, verify the purchase order, and send it out in Meditech. So what we've done, go ahead and on to the next slide, Anthony. And we're going to show you how some of this is running as I'm talking here. And this is rather a long video. I think this one's about 10 minutes, right, Anthony? So we're going to just run some of this, but you'll see how the process works as I'm talking through. So we navigate to the Meditech screen, and then we are actually pulling some data in a minute here out of a cost spreadsheet and pulling that data into the desktop application in Meditech. And a lot of this comes from the cost center data. It comes from over time, the hospital had these cost centers defined, and they were not in the Meditech system. They were in another system, so they did an extract of their general ledger system into an Excel spreadsheet, and then that is used in the Meditech system to do the PO. So what normally would happen was the accounting person would go into the GL system, look up the cost center, and then go into Meditech, and then put in the PO. Well, obviously, that's very time-consuming, right? There also is an additional step that we added here to do the purchase order send out via an email system. So there's a lot of steps you have to do when you create your PO in Meditech, and this automated that process by integrating the different components together. So I'm not going to play the whole video, but let's go on to the next slide.
Hey, Ted, a quick question here.
Sure.
So are you doing this through Citrix, or is it native on top of Meditech?
It's native on top of Meditech, I believe. Eric, can you answer that one?
Yes, in this case, but there was a lot of where we had to use Citrix as well. And so, yeah, it's very flexible that way. If we're able to work with the desktop directly, we can do that. But in a number of cases, yes, we did have to use Citrix.
And another question to follow up on that, one of the things that I've done a lot of POCs with medical applications, such as Allscripts and things, and in a lot of those older legacy applications, what I found is that the selectors or how the selectors within that don't work extremely well. So you have to put anchors and things on that. Did you guys have any issues in that essence with this version of Meditech, being able to find selectors and create really reliable, robust automation?
Yeah, there was some challenges with that, and so the team did have to do some of that, but the outcome finally was that these are very stable. Over the year and a half or so that they've been running, we don't ever get situations where it's really missing anything.
Awesome, cool.
Yeah,
thanks for that.
Good points, Melvin. Now, I as we said when we do webinars before, Melvin, feel free to chime in and facilitate. How's that?
Absolutely.
So I want to talk a little bit about the cost savings on this one, because we were doing a lot of transactions per week. The hospital was, and they had 3 to 4 people doing this process. They got it down to about 1 person doing it, and really automated the whole vendor process. So it was a significant time saving on their part. It also helped in their supply scheduling, because they had to do a lot of supply purchase orders. They had a lot of extra they were doing because their PO system was so bad to get stuff ordered. There was a big backlog on it, and this kind of eliminated that backlog. Is there any other questions on revenue cycle management, HBill? So what I'd like to move on to now is our HIE integration use case. And in HIE integration, in this case, we're integrating with Chime, which is a Connecticut HIE. And what happened was, and go ahead and I can talk through this as we're looking at the video. Again, this one's a bit of a long video as well. What happened was they did the HIE integration years ago from Meditech, and would actually send the records up to the HIE, and that worked pretty well. But it was the error routines, the errors, the records that were sent up and that had an error in it, where the data wasn't available or the lookup table on the HIE side wasn't updated for that doctor record. For example, a doctor removed from one hospital to another hospital, it was not updated on the HIE side, therefore it come back as an error to the hospital. Now, for years and years and years, I believe in this case we're about 5 years back, where they just didn't have time to go back and fix these errors. And really, there was a bit of a issue on their audits and things like that. But it was something they tried to get to time and time again. They just didn't have the resources to get it done. So we went and created a automation for them to take that error data out of the error report from Chime, and then go do the lookup in Meditech, and then re-update that, resend a new transaction back up to Chime. So in that whole process, we're able to update the data that was needed on the Chime side. And that was a very manual intensive. If you had to do it manually, it'd have been a very labor intensive. I think we measured at one point about 5,000 hours would be needed to do that. We actually ran it over a couple months, different times, and we cleared the backlog of the 5 years of data. And now we have a monthly process that they run monthly, an unattended web bot, which allows them to just keep up to date on it. So it really removed all of that work with thousands of hours of keying data into the HIE and cleaned up all the back data and the audit issue. It was just something they wanted to
Ted?
Yeah,
I just wanted to add to that there's a recurring theme for all these, and that's the amount of flexibility. Just like the GE to Meditech, this one also, they would run in batches and run it when this is an unattended bot. So once it's kicked off, it's going to run, but they would set some parameters and be able to run it as they wanted to make sure that they could go back and check some things, make sure it was working right. But they didn't have to set it up, run once, and let it run a long time. They had a lot of flexibility how they actually wanted to get caught up.
Great point. Melvin, anything else you want to point out on HIE?
Yeah, I was just actually going to ask two questions. One, is there any underlying technology on the Chime side, or is it just the portal that you're interacting with?
Correct. You're just the portal. On most of the HIEs, you can do transactions to them, HL7 or FHIR or CCA documents even. But what happens is if there's an error, the error comes back just to the portal or as a PDF report.
Okay.
The transactions normally on a normal basis go on an EDI type HL7 interface.
Yep.
That's all good. It's the errors that you get back from the HIE that are not, there's no easy way for the hospital to handle the errors. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. So, to me, as I'm thinking about this, the real risk here is that if there's an error with the patient, that patient shows up at a different hospital and we don't have a current medications list or something like that might be available. I could be allergic to penicillin and end up in a different hospital at having a car wreck. Somebody administers penicillin and suddenly I'm dead. So
correct. That would be a bad thing. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. No, I can't believe they've just been sitting on the problem for 5 years, but what a great use case for automation, just to, from a patient efficacy standpoint, to be able to solve that. That's awesome. And I would imagine that because they're only running it once a month now they can take that unattended robot and repurpose it for other work outside of the time that it's as it's sitting idle outside of the time that it's running this process.
Absolutely, that's true.
Yeah, absolutely. They run many processes on a single web bot because a lot of things, a number of things, particularly in the revenue cycle management and in this process, are monthly for them.
Yep.
So it works out really well. And I believe this one is scheduled in the middle of the month where hardly anything is going on because the reports come down like the second week of the month, I believe.
Okay. So. And so you guys are managing that through the orchestrator, just all of the jobs that they have?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Awesome.
And it's an interesting part of HIE because we all know about HIAs. We all know how they interface on HL7 or Fire or everything. But you never think about all the complexity to the integration of the hospital, the HIE, and all the back and forth that has to happen between them.
No, absolutely. I mean, I look at this, it reminds me of actually when I was talking about opiate abuse. Every state runs a prescription drug monitoring program, and all of those databases are state led. They're different in every state. But same scenario is that if I'm getting faulty reporting from one pharmacy or another, I essentially could inadvertently write an opiate to a patient that has just received an opiate from another physician.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. This is an awesome use case. Thanks so much, guys.
Great. So we're going to go on. If there's any other questions, please chime in or raise your hand. But we're going to go on to the telehealth integration. So obviously, with COVID, everything happened very quickly last March, and everybody had to slam in a telehealth solution. So go ahead to the next slide so you can just run the demo while I'm talking. And these hospitals were no different. And a lot of the problems with the telehealth integration in this case was Amwell integrates the eClinicalWorks, where eClinicalWorks goes to another set of vendors to get actually back to Meditech. They didn't go directly to Meditech on the integration, and we were not involved with how Amwell actually connected initially because it basically got slammed in as a SaaS model, right? But one of the key things that you have to do in any integration of multiple EMRs in this case is to have your consistent MRN number, your medical record number. We have to have a consistent patient ID throughout all the systems. And in this case, what happened was they had their medical record number was propagated from Meditech into eClinicalWorks. So the easiest thing for us to do was to take the MNR from eClinicalWorks and expose that to Amwell Telehealth Provider, which is a SaaS model. Now, this becomes very challenging, actually, is what we learned through this process. Particularly when there's two real scenarios. We have a new patient or an existing patient. Existing patient's actually kind of easier. You do the patient lookup and you add the link that into your Amwell record. That becomes your patient ID for the Amwell record. But for a new patient, how do I handle a new patient that comes in only on telehealth? The first time this patient came into the system was on telehealth. So we have to do a lot of steps in that case to actually create the patient in Meditech, in eClinicalWorks. And in this case, we did an interface engine called Cloverleaf, which basically helped us update and create the patient through the whole process within the hospital system, both on their in-hospital and outpatient systems. So the interesting point about this was this process ran, and we were able to pick up the patient ID, bring it in, and we had two sets of processes. Essentially, there was a back-end set of web bots that were out there waiting on data, and then updating back to Cloverleaf if necessary or not. And then you had the Amwell side going and pulling the data from Cloverleaf if needed. So it was kind of a two-way process between Amwell, Cloverleaf, and even Quadramed, which is another smart ID tool, before it got back to the records in Meditech. So it was a rather complicated process of a two-way workflow, which we thought was really interesting because a lot of times when we're doing RPA, it's kind of a one-way flow, right? Where we're going and doing process A, and then we're going to step B, right? In this case, what we did was we had both unintended bots and attended bots be able to grab the patient data and then actually pull the patient data back out. Eric, is anything you want to add in on that one?
Yeah, this is one that used a dedicated unattended bot because it was transactional, so it needed to be as close to real time as possible. And there were some tight constraints on this. There was a 4 to 6 week window to get this in and get it working, and we were working with multiple vendors. And again, I'm just impressed with the flexibility because Typically, an automation is more like HBIL, where you know what the process is, you break down the process, you know what the end result needs to be. But in this case, this was atypical in that we were building something that didn't exist prior, and working with vendors that don't normally work together and pulling it all together. And so where some of the flexibility came in that was great was that as we were building it, some changes needed to happen. Some of the business logic, some of the business rules, how we were going to get things and process them. And so we were able to make those changes quickly and meet that timeline using the automation. So that's one of the great things that worked out for this project.
Yeah, question there. So great use case. Yeah, my question is if not for UiPath, what would they have done?
They would have had to work with all the vendors for custom solutions, and that would have taken a lot more time, and they would not have met that timeline.
Wow. So they would have had to custom build something to wireframe everything together and do it while people are working from home or trying to figure out how to work from home.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The time constraint was a very big, portion on this one.
And I don't know that this is really related to the component of UiPath, but one of the questions I have when you talked about creating a new patient, and one of the challenges I've always seen within EHRs, and or I say always seen is how many, if I have Joe Smith and in eClinical Works and maybe a different Joe Smith in Meditech, what types of, because you guys are working across all those solutions, did you put any logic in there to ensure that, hey, we're not creating a new patient just to create a new patient? We're sure that this is a unique new patient versus somebody that's maybe mood or something like that. Does that make sense?
It does. That's a big portion to what the logic you have to put in place. And we did do a lot of work on that. And actually, if you look at the workflows, they're fairly complex because of that issue. Exactly.
Yep. So did you have anything in there from a billing perspective? So I've created a new patient, and now I have to process and create their insurance or something like that if they're coming. And I'm just asking off the top of my head. I wasn't sure if there was a way to onboard that patient, because there is more of a digital front desk as opposed to walking into an office.
Yeah, I don't think we did that, because once the patient was created in Amwell, a lot of the processes picked up from Meditech, actually.
Okay.
Because once you had the patient record, then you were able to work with the patient, and you had your doctors and your prescriptions and all that sort of stuff there. So there wasn't a lot of integration past getting the patient in a system, so they can.
Okay, once they could access Amwell, then everything was flowed through those processes.
Yeah,
Correct.
the various systems took care of that. The automation was primarily doing the plumbing between all of them.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. So go to the next slide here, Anthony, for me. So I just want to touch one time again on, since we have a couple minutes left. We've done a lot of these, as we said, straight through processes, like Meditech pre-registration, which is a big one. There's other chime processes we've done, drug mapping, and but the ones that strike me, as I mentioned before, is the migration, where we're using it for both. We're migrating whole systems together from one system to another system, and then we're doing the testing around that. That has saved so much time for the IT organization of the provider. These are huge projects that can really take a lot of people, and using robotic process automation, we really automated a tremendous amount of effort. So thank you, Anthony. Why don't you go ahead?
Sure. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the costs of the implementation for an RPA. So typically what we do is we take it, and when we're evaluating what type of RPA is going to be best needed, we need to take a look at three major components. So the first one is going to be the complexity of the automation. So we're going to take a look and see if that automation has either we base it on either low, medium, or high of the complexity, and that typically could depend on how many different steps are involved, and we'll get into that in a second. The second is the initial business process analysis. Sorry. So the initial business process analysis is what we'll do is we'll start to take a look at different things like, was this a process that is newer, or has this process been in place for quite some time? And that will also play into how much a robotic process automation will cost. And the third is resource availability. This is actually very key to creating any bot. So if we do not have the subject matter experts available to us, this is where it becomes a challenge to us to recreate that process and then create a bot around it.
Anthony, that includes not only people, but really the systems, test data, all that kind of thing. That's part of the resource availability.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that, Eric. So just going into that a little bit deeper, so complexity around the automation. So this could involve the number of steps in the operation, the logical conditions within the operations, the sum of validations and checks within the operations, and the number of systems involved. So, complexity could be anywhere from low to high if you're just using a single system, or, in some of the cases that we saw, there could be a much higher complexity because we're using multiple systems and we're having to, require multiple steps to go through each one of those systems. The second, a little bit more detail, we had talked about the process itself. So if this is a fairly new process to your hospital that you have, if it's something that you're, for example, telehealth, we had talked about that. So in telehealth, it was relatively new. There was, COVID had, just come out, and people were scrambling to try and figure out what to do for telehealth. So that was a relatively new process. So because it wasn't buckled down as much, there were some things that had to be figured out along with it during that time. And so it really depends on whether this is a mature, stable, well-documented process, or if it lacks documentation and it's relatively new. And the third and final reason, which again is probably one of the biggest here, is the resource availability. So subject matter experts, IT support staff, and system readiness. So if your systems are not ready, if your IT staff is not ready, if they're not available to share that information, it's going to be a little bit more of a challenge for us. So we always ask that, those subject matter experts are sharing everything step by step with the process, with our developers, to ensure that we're going to have a smooth transition and build out a smooth robot for you. So just to give you some basic numbers, and these are not, set in stone by any means whatsoever. This is just very broad range. So we're looking at low, medium, and high cost for different bots, right? And a low cost would be low complexity with a stable process, and we have every person available to us at all times. Whereas the high complexity, high cost solution, you'd be looking at, potentially in the 75,000 plus range. Now, what I would say to this is that the processes that you saw today, the 3 different ones that we showed, would probably fit all within that medium cost range. So there was nothing that really said this was a simple process with low complexity, or there was anything that was extremely high end. But all these processes typically, had multiple steps. They were dealing with a few different systems. We had the subject matter experts that were available to us at times, and they would fall within that middle range.
Hey, Anthony, a quick question on that.
Sure.
I'm assuming that this is your professional services cost alone. It doesn't include, this isn't software as well.
Eric, would that be
Yep,
correct?
yep,
Yeah.
that's right.
Okay.
And I would say for the ones that we showed, those were probably more toward the low cost aside.
Okay.
One
Okay.
of them, the HBill one, was probably more toward the medium, but the other ones more toward the low cost. And
Great.
if I can just add one other thing, just
Sure.
sometimes a way to consider bringing down the cost is when we start, we're always thinking about doing an automation end to end of a whole process, but sometimes or a lot of times it can be the 80-20. If we can get 80% automated, we're still going to realize a great amount of benefit. And so sometimes it's just back off a little bit on a few of the steps or a couple things, just to get back from that say medium or high complexity down into a more low complexity area.
Thanks for that,
Yeah,
Eric.
we see that a lot too. A lot of our customers, what I try to tell them, especially when you're talking about attended automation or a digital assistant, let's focus on automating essentially what I would consider microprocesses. It could be 20, 50 clicks, if you will, as part of a workflow. And if I can shrink those 50 clicks to 5, and that end user happens to be a pathologist, that's a huge benefit to the system. So how can we make our providers, our clinical staff more efficient within that process? So totally agree.
All right. So this actually concludes the end of our presentation that we wanted to do for you.